Chronicles of Spectro.
What the hell was that?
Spectro, thank God you're okay.
Uni, what's going on?
I'm sorry, but I had to do what was needed to be done. I managed to stop time itself. Thankfully, I allowed you and I to move around in this state, but it won't last long.
Well, we need to act fast. Can you still use your powers?
Of course I can. My powers are limited to my imagination. The powerful it gets, the likelihood I'll lose them completely. Right now, I'm going to use what's left of my energy to scan the source of this big wave. In the meantime, you should find something to do while I'm in this state.
Well, best of luck, Uni. You got this. Thousands of years ago, before the main timeline of the Reviewerverse, there was once a reviewer by the name of Apollo Zhack. He was destined to become the Reviewerverse's savior, but also prophesized as its destroyer. Apollo was a reviewer for hire, but was also a warrior in his own right, donning a powerful object known as the Exceed Rever Unit, which allowed him to transform into the hero known as Rever 1. The Nerdpocalypse was about to arrive, and Apollo would soon have to come face to face with his most deadliest foe, Cinera, aka Rever 2. Their first ever battle would soon be their last. As the conflict to bring about the Nerdpocalypse soon came to an end, the Reviewerverse would once again be reset, due to Rever 1's cataclysmic wipe of the second Nerdpocalypse. And with this reset, we come back to another thousands of years later, in which we now have the main Reviewerverse timeline that we see today. Apollo Zhack's whereabouts are left unknown. Legend has it that he may have continued to become the Rever in another life, but due to various anomalies that continue to reboot the Reviewerverse over and over again, it is sad to say that we may never hear from Apollo Zhack ever again. And although he may be gone, his character lives on. Now, before we talk about the Atop the Fourth Wall movie and the concepts of Champion story arc, let's talk about All Critics Must Die. This was a project produced by Geek Vision TV and featured many reviewers of the now-defunct website going on an adventure to stop an evil force by the name of Tograph. Tograph's mission is to not only eliminate any reviewer who gets in his way, but also summon the living embodiment of bad movies, Mal Cinema. In order to do so, he must utilize a reviewer strong enough to withstand as a host, and begins to target a reviewer by the name of Arthur Knowledge. This story features the likes of Count Jackula, the Horror Guru, Spazmaster, Some Jerk with a Camera, The Wire, Mikey Insanity, Stefan Korzek, and Ilnej as they do battle against the evil forces that try to plague the world with bad movies. This movie was originally supposed to be released in 2013, but had several delays, which ultimately led to the project being cancelled up until 2020, in which it finally got released on April Fool's Day. I highly recommend you guys go check it out for yourselves. It's literally under an hour. And trust me, you're gonna get a lot of laughs out of this one. This was pretty funny to watch. What makes this project very significant is the fact that there's a lot of references to the wider Reviewerverse. But what's notable are the reviewers who are featured in this story, who later went on to become reviewers for ThatGuyWithTheGlasses.com, aka Channel Awesome, who are now former reviewers because of many reasons. In terms of the world building for the Reviewerverse, it literally implies that there is a living embodiment of bad movies out there that is currently living on Count Jackula's shelf. But I don't want to spoil it any further because I highly recommend you guys go check it out for yourselves. You can find it for free on YouTube. It's only under an hour long. And if you're a die-hard Reviewerverse fanatic, please check this out. This was made for you. Now, I want to come back to the cast of All Critics Must Die because each and every one of them has something unique they bring to the table, especially with Count Jackula. You see, Count Jackula isn't a human, he is an alien, specifically a Draculon from the planet Dracula. Now, we don't know a specific date on when he arrived to our planet, but we do know an exact reason for why he came to Earth. And that was because of his interest in the macabre and mundane that Earth had to offer. The horror guru also tends to have a lot of collaborations with Dracula, mainly because of the fact that in real life, the two are roommates. There's not a whole lot I could say about the horror guru other than the fact that in All Critics Must Die, he is described as an individual who collects strange artifacts. And we do kind of see it in the form of one of his side characters, Dagmar, an individual who lives within a mirror. Then there's The Wire, a more or lesser known reviewer who is made up of living television. Their main superpower is to allow themselves to transfer themselves to various digital screens, whether that be a television screen, a phone, etc. And while reviewers like Spazmaster, The Jerk, and Il Nej are just your regular run-of-the-mill reviewers, there's one in particular that really caught my interest, and that was Arthur Knowledge. Arthur was the host of The Quest for Geekdom, a web show that was released on Geek Vision TV. His whole shtick is the fact that he is destined to become the Grand Master for the Paladins of Hope. There is a literal knightly order that revolves around the realm of geekdom, and they are destined to protect geek culture from the forces of evil that try to harm it. Arthur then decides to become a reviewer and is trained under the wing of Ivan, a member of the knightly order, as Arthur does whatever it takes to protect geek culture using his magic sword. It kind of sucks that this show didn't really take off because I was actually interested by the premise. Especially when you have reviewers like Erod and Linkara who have similar backgrounds, while Arthur's side of the Reviewerverse gives something a little interesting in regards to the world building that fits really well with the aesthetic and theme of this shared universe. And it kind of sucks that at the time of me recording this video, they haven't uploaded anything and it's likely they won't be coming back anytime soon. The only ones who are still active within the reviewer space is Horror Guru, Count Dracula, sometimes Il Nej, he hasn't uploaded in about a year, and in regards to The Jerk, he too has also retired but has now become a host of his own podcast in the form of Escape from Vault Disney. Now, in regards to where All Critics Must Die fits into the timeline, it makes perfect sense that initially, given the fact that it was supposed to be released in 2013, it fits perfectly well as a storyline set a year after the events of To Boldly Flee, given how that was the original intention for All Critics Must Die, which is actually really funny considering the fact that in an episode of Some Jerk with a Camera, the jerk mentions about the project not being released, but acknowledging the fact that the event had already happened in universe. Now, while Some Jerk with a Camera is just your average ordinary reviewer, he does have a side character that does have an impact within the events of All Critics Must Die, especially with the build-up to said character. And it just so happens to be a parody of a very disgraceful celebrity, and his name is Kill Bobsby. And he's supposed to be a parody of Bill Cosby. Yeah, you get the idea. The whole shtick is that Jerk used to make these jokes, but given the fact that he kind of found it distasteful, it kind of haunted him in a way, and thus Kill Bobsby took a life of its own and began to haunt the Jerk, and we see the type of impact that Kill Bobsby has towards the Jerk within the events of All Critics Must Die, in which the Jerk embraces the joke and weaponizing it against the main antagonist. Coming back to Channel Awesome, while there were a lot of reviewers featured in the anniversary specials, there were some that really never had a time to shine. Hell, it's kind of funny how behind the scenes, a lot of former Channel Awesome producers only joined the website so they can be featured in these anniversary specials. And one of these reviewers is my personal favorite, Erod the Blockbuster Buster. Erod probably has the most complex and interesting backgrounds of any reviewer within the Reviewerverse. Because unlike other reviewers who just have access to all these magical items and weapons, Erod is the real deal. He's one of the few reviewers within the Reviewerverse to have superpowers. How did he get these powers? A long time ago, a young Erod came out of the premiere of the Phantom Menace in which he was disgusted at what he saw. And out of nowhere, a higher being had summoned in Erod's living room, giving him a magic hammer in which he dubbed Lucille, and giving him the mantle of the Blockbuster Buster, a title that has been passed down from generation to generation. By gaining these powers, the user has the ability to touch any physical media that they touch and gain the powers from it. For example, if Erod wanted to gain Spider-Man's powers, he could simply touch a copy of any Spider-Man movie in existence. He can even give you these powers if you grab hold of him. It's a huge shame the fact that this guy barely had any representation within the anniversary specials. Hell, he would have been a huge help considering the fact that, again, his character has literal superpowers. It's actually quite interesting how the Phantom Menace has an influence on both Erod and the events of All Critics Must Die, because it's established that Mouse Cinema themselves was the impact that influenced bad movies moving forward. And according to Erod himself, one of the very first angry reviews was based around the Phantom Menace. So essentially, Star Wars The Phantom Menace was the trendsetter for the events that would lead into the wider reviewerverse.
Imagine it, being that dedicated, waiting in line for months just to see what great new vision lies ahead for Star Wars. And then, what happened at the end of the movie? We'd never ever forget.
I kinda liked it.
But nevertheless, when this movie came out, it was like 1,000 voices cried out in terror, and I will not let them be silenced!
Now, look, I'm gonna be honest, I don't think Phantom Menace is that bad. Oh, okay, just hear me out. It's not as bad as Attack of the Clones or even The Rise of Skywalker, okay? We've had worse. Then there's Diamanda Hagan, a reviewer who just so happens to be an evil dictator of the in-universe country of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is even referenced in All Critics Must Die.
Look, I've no interest in helping Hagestani orphans. I'm not falling for that scam twice. Ow! Fuck you!
Diamanda specializes in reviewing cult films, the weird and mundane, and Doctor Who. And yes, because their persona is a literal dictator, they have their own minions to do their dirty work. It's really hard for me to talk about Diamanda Hagan, not because of the fact that I'm not into their content, but primarily given the fact that their history is somewhat all over the place, especially given the fact that a lot of their reviews had been taken down and some of it's partial lost media at this point. So God knows when and where Diamanda fought a fairy, as mentioned in the crossover A Voice from the Dark. And unlike the other reviewers, yes, they are straight up evil. They don't care who they kill, they don't care who they screw over. They're an evil dictator and they just do whatever they like. Now, there's actually one storyline that not a lot of people know about, including myself, in which involves Diamanda Hagan being the main focus, and that story is called Fuck the Internet. This was a 40-minute short film in which Diamanda Hagan goes around and lures a group of internet reviewers, such as Spazmaster and The Wire, and snuffs them out. But it's revealed that this was just a skit within a skit, and Diamanda Hagan decides to erase the whole thing, not releasing it to the public, despite the fact that in our reality it was already released. So, placing it within the timeline, Fuck the Internet was released in the summer of 2011, occurring on the same year as Suburban Nights. One of the most interesting aspects of the Blockbuster Buster is the fact that in Season 8, we finally get to see a previous Buster user in the form of Una, who came back in order to reclaim the powers that are now bestowed to Erod. This led to a very lengthy battle in which involved Linkara and Obscurus Lupa. In order to reclaim her powers back, she must grab Lucille and transfer that energy into her. Unfortunately, it came at a price. Because of Erod and Lucille's various encounters with many deadly foes, Lucille developed a safeguard in which if any villain were to try to grab hold of them and gain their powers, it will not only prevent them from using said powers, but it will kill them in the process, as only the current Blockbuster Buster is allowed to use said powers. Although this wouldn't be the last time we saw Una. In Season 9 of the Blockbuster Buster, her past self crossed paths with Erod as they reviewed 2019's Dark Phoenix. This was the first and unfortunately last time we'll ever see a former Blockbuster Buster that isn't Erod. Coming back to Diamanda Hagan, in Afghanistan they actually have their own news network, HNN. It's revealed through one of these segments that Obama likely didn't run for his second term, and that he was succeeded by President Julius Darien, portrayed by Doug Walker. And over in the UK, there is a character called Prime Minister Forsyth Stewart, portrayed by reviewer Ashens. Now, this conflict all started due to the fact that there was an armed militia from Minnesota that began their attack on Afghanistan. I wish I can show you the clip of the attack, but here's the issue. Like I said before, a lot of Diamanda Hagan's videos are considered lost media, and I can no longer find said video that depicts such scene. Which then leads into a very interesting topic within the Reviewerverse canon. Are real-world politics canon to the Reviewerverse? And the simple answer is yes. Yes, they are. Certain reviewers within the Reviewerverse don't really shy away from the world of politics and real-world issues. And a lot of it stems from the fact that because of all the outlandish and ridiculous stuff that happens within the Reviewerverse and the lives of these reviewers, and why there's barely any military involvement regarding stuff like the plot hole, or literal freaking kaijus that begin to terrorize New Jersey, it's all due to the distractions that are occurring in the real world. Because why would the military care less about attacking things like giant Rob the Robots or Godzillas? Now, in terms of Dr. Insano's status post-plot hole, he kinda just vanished off the face of the earth. And yeah, I know, due to IRL reasons, but let's just ignore that for now. We know that previously he was the President of the United States, participated within the events of Kick-Assia, and joined the rest of the reviewers within the new universe. The last time we saw Dr. Insano was a small appearance in the Atop the Fourth Wall movie, in which he refers to himself as Dr. Insano. And yeah, that's kind of it. Ever since Noah Antweiler, aka the Spoonie One, quietly retired the Spoonie experiment, we never really saw the character ever again. But it doesn't change the fact that Dr. Insano isn't the only mad scientist within the Reviewerverse. Enter Dr. Terawatt, formerly known as Dr. Holocaust. You probably already know why he changed his name. Before he was Dr. Terawatt, he was a man by the name of Brian S. Around 2009, he took up the mantle of Dr. Holocaust and began to reign terror within the Reviewerverse. Like seriously, this guy had beef with everyone. Chester A. Bum, Dr. Insano, Savage Bandito, Captain Awesome, and even the nostalgic critic himself, who was made aware of the Doctor's presence. Now, this won't be the last time we'll ever bring up the Mad Doctor, because he appears in a lot of different projects. But for now, let's finally talk about the Atop the Fourth Wall movie. If To Boldly Flee was like Pokemon the first movie, then the Atop the Fourth Wall movie would be the Mewtwo Returns of its storyline. The story behind the Atop the Fourth Wall movie is that Linkara is having second thoughts on continuing his review show, simply because of the fact that almost every time he sits down and does a review, he is always thrown in a life and death situation. Yeah, I know how that feels. He's one of the few reviewers within the Reviewerverse to acknowledge this, realizing that no matter what he does, no matter what he reviews, no matter how comfortable he is in the comfort of his home, he's always getting attacked. Deciding to lay low with his reviewer buddies, along with his new pal, US government agent Alan Park, they are called into action in order to save a US government-built ship that was launched into space that unfortunately lost communication. The ship is known as the Kyle Estes, and it uses the same technology that was utilized and shown in To Boldly Flee, in which the technology was built by Dr. Insano himself to build a spacecraft that looks like a ship on the outside, but on the inside looks like a regular old house. As our heroes travel to space using Linkara's ship, the Chronicles 1, they find the source of the cut communication and realize that it was Mechakara the entire time and that he had survived in the events of To Boldly Flee.
I still had the artifact known as Malachite's Hand on my person. My consciousness was preserved inside of it. And when the crew of this vessel brought it aboard, the artifact absorbed enough energy from the craft to restore my form.
Linkara is obviously traumatized by this, but decides to pull through. They land on one of Jupiter's moons, Europa, which they previously traveled and landed to in To Boldly Flee, and do battle against Mechakara. Unbeknownst to the reviewers, they find out that Europa contains a strange force that allows them to heal faster. And because Mechakara is non-organic, they easily defeat Mechakara, rescue the members of the Kyle Estes, and return home, with Linkara appreciating more of his reviewer side and overcoming his past traumas. But the story doesn't end there for our fellow reviewer. Enter the Contest of Champions. Back in October 9th of 2017, Linkara was invited to participate in the latest Contest of Champions, an interdimensional tournament in which various individuals across the vast multiverse compete to win a special and valuable prize. And upon Linkara accepting this invitation, we find out that the prize itself is the Infinity Gauntlet. Linkara realizes that if any of his opponents are evil, he doesn't want them to fall into the wrong hands. Upon entering the contest, he goes up against various foes as well as gaining new allies in the process. But one of his most deadliest happens to be the Bandit Chief, a participant who has partaken in the contest in the past who has a very notorious reputation, one that alarms Linkara to the fullest. Now, I mentioned before that the log had already covered most of Linkara's lore, but up to this date, the Contest of Champions was never covered. The Contest of Champions story arc literally took 8 years for it to be complete. In between it were other story arcs. I'm pretty sure 3 or 2 were being covered at the same time while the Contest of Champions was still going on. And to make matters even worse, COVID-19 affected the story not only in real life, but also in universe as well, since the Contest of Champions was also being plagued by COVID-19, as the virus was being spread all across the multiverse, causing many characters to stay in quarantine. But once things started to die down, the Contest of Champions quickly got back up, and as Linkara continued to become victorious against his many competitors, it was finally time for him to come face to face with the Bandit Chief. Now, I actually forgot to mention the rules of the Contest of Champions. One of the many rules of the contest that it is a non-lethal competition. Players cannot kill, and if they do, they are immediately disqualified and banned from the Contest of Champions. And another rule is that competitors can choose the type of battle of their preference. For example, you can literally compete in a thumb war against an opponent. And it just so happens that Linkara wants to cap off his victory by competing against the Bandit Chief by playing a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And of course, you know how the story goes. Bandit Chief cheats, he gets disqualified, and Linkara wins. And the Infinity Gauntlet is now in his possession. But there's a twist.
The Infinity Gauntlet only works in the universe it originates from. That's the trick of the contest. The reason why past winners don't participate again.
As of me recording this video, that's all there is for the Atop the Fourth Wall storylines. But I think one of the craziest things to happen within the Reviewerverse canon is the fact that back in 2012, the exact year that Taboli Flea occurred, H.P. fucking Lovecraft resurrected from the dead. He joined Channel Awesome and started a web show called Ask Lovecraft. This was a show hosted by Lehman Kessler, who does an amazing impression of H.P. Lovecraft. And yes, in universe, they treat him as the real H.P. Lovecraft. And yes, he even acknowledges the name of his cat. Now let's talk about the more lesser known web show, Battle Geek Plus. This show focuses on two best friends, Josh and Ryan, who go on various misadventures fighting against video game characters. Now, while this channel also posts other unrelated skits, the Battle Geek Plus show is heavily connected within the Reviewerverse, mainly because of one character that we previously mentioned, Dr. Terawatt. He appears in the 10th episode of Battle Geek Plus. In said episode, he tracks down one of Josh's exes, all because she foiled his plans in world domination. The duo help aid Josh's ex, named Heather, and eventually defeat Dr. Holocaust. Although this wouldn't be the last time that Dr. Holocaust made an appearance within Battle Geek Plus, because in universe there was an auction to sell off the company Capcom, and many former reviewers of Channel Awesome participated in the bidding war. And just as things were about to go right, Dr. Holocaust decides to make a presence and steal the show. Attempting to inherit the Capcom empire, he quickly fails as the bidding war is won by Donkey Kong out of all people. Speaking of video games, let's talk more about the angry video game nerd, because honestly, I completely forgot about him. Not because of the fact that I didn't want to bring him into this Reviewerverse retrospective. If anything, I wanted to make him important as much as possible, but I completely forgot about him because it was overshadowed with other reviewers who were very significant within the timeline. It's almost apparent that a lot of people have seen almost every single episode of The Angry Video Game Nerd. And it's also easy to determine that a lot of the skits that occur within his reviews aren't really significant, despite the fact that they are really big, especially with his battle with Rob the Robot. A lot of the Angry Video Game Nerd storylines are very self-contained, like his multiple encounters with Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger, and his beef with Bugs Bunny, who keeps appearing in his videos. The only storyline that I think is really significant within AVGN's lore, especially with the Reviewerverse, is the AVGN movie. The AVGN film really reveals a lot about what goes on behind the scenes of the Angry Video Game Nerd, like the fact that we find out that he actually has a cameraman by the name of Cooper. The plot centers around the urban legend of the infamous E.T. video game. Legend has it that the game was so poorly received that all copies of the game were then buried in a landfill. And because of the AVGN's reputation, there's this group called Cockburn Industries that wants to create a sequel to the game titled ET2 because of copyright reasons. We also kind of figure out that despite the fact that the Angry Video Game Nerd is very successful on the internet, he also works part-time at a bootleg GameStop. I think this is kind of a funny addition to the AVGN mythology because despite being one of the most popular creators at the time and still to this very day, he works part-time at a GameStop. I mean, nowadays with the economy of this state, that's kind of realistic. The fans really want him to review E.T., but he refuses. Finally opening up to the fans, he decides to go on an adventure with his buddy Cooper and Cockburn representative Mandy, as they travel to the supposed landfill sites that the terrible E.T. games were buried under. But they accidentally get the attention of a very villainous military general by the name of General Dark Onward. Yes, that's his fucking name. But just wait until you hear the name of the true big bad of this movie, Death Mwathix. Apparently, Death Mwathix is buried underneath Mount Fuji, and if he gets released, he could destroy all of humanity as we know it. And ironically, Atari's logo just so happens to be based around Mount Fuji. Now, to make a long story short, Death Mwathix reawakens from Mount Fuji, causes chaos within Las Vegas. The AVGN teams up with an alien from Area 51. They stop Death Mwathix and the military that's chasing them down. And the AVGN concludes with a review of E.T. the Extraterrestrial on Atari 2600, one of the worst games ever made. Now, this movie can be brushed off as non-canon given the fact that Cooper never returns again, as well as Cockburn Industries, and we never hear anything in regards to the significance of the AVGN movie. But the only thing significant about it is the fact that it does get referenced in a later review of the Angry Video Game Nerd, in which he reviews casino games. The AVGN returns to Vegas as one of his guest hosts remarks about the events that transpired within the events of the Angry Video Game Nerd movie, with Death Mwathix causing chaos within Las Vegas.
This place up pretty good after that monster attacked. You actually saw that thing. Why don't you talk about it more?
What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
And the AVGN rabbit hole only gets deeper from there, because I'm here to more or less propose a theory rather than an actual thing that happens within the timeline, and that theory is the chronologically confused AVGN timeline. There are multiple AVGN timelines within the Reviewerverse, some that are canon and some that are not canon. But regards to the canonicity of the timelines, it really doesn't matter, because there are a lot of different timelines that branch off from the main timeline, and they are really worth noting because it actually gets addressed within one of the episodes of the Angry Video Game Nerd, specifically the Bernstein Bears review. The main timeline AVGN runs into various other AVGNs from different timelines. Each one of them comes from a different universe in which Bernstein is actually Berenstain. And trying to determine himself that Berenstain is actually Bernstein, he finds out about the Mandela effect and the crossing between various timelines that created this bizarre paradox, ultimately coming across a other alternate AVGN that tells him about the multiple universes that have different spellings of the Bernstein name.
There exist many universes with infinite little minor differences. The universe you come from, it was spelled Steen. At some point between your childhood and now, you and a lot of other people unknowingly crossed over into this universe where it is spelled Stain. That's only one example of many other things that people blame on bad memory.
There are many examples of this in various AVGN episodes. For example, in his review of The Immortal, the AVGN is killed by the dragon at the very end of the video. But in his very next review, which was Spawn, he finds himself in hell with the Violator. That's just one example of the canon timeline in which the AVGN survives from a deadly outcome. However, there are branching timelines in which the AVGN doesn't survive, like in his review of one of the Shrek video games, in which he is burned by the cult of Shrek. And somehow in his very next review, it's never explained how he ended up surviving that whole ordeal. So maybe, as explained in the Berenstain Bears review, there's a chance that in the canon timeline, the AVGN did survive that encounter with the cult. Just like how there's one timeline in which the AVGN was killed by Jason Voorhees.
Killed me.
And the more that we talk about the AVGN, we have to talk about Cinemassacre as a whole. Because it isn't just the AVGN that fits within the Reviewerverse timeline. Because if we want to go one step beyond, that also means that Board James is also involved. Despite Board James being a self-contained review series, it does imply that Board James and the AVGN share the same body as sort of a split personality sort of situation. And Board James itself also has branching timelines. There's one timeline, which is the main timeline of the Board James review series, that sees the demise of Board James, and the main timeline that reveals that Board James itself is a prequel to the main AVGN series. But that can't make sense whatsoever because Board James appears in Kick-Assia. So if the AVGN was already done with the Board James persona, how the hell is he able to appear in Kick-Assia? Well, that's kind of an easy answer. 1, IRL reasons because of the fact that the script writers didn't know before then, and 2, plot hole reasons. Since the reviewers are now in a new timeline, the universe that we see is no longer the same universe that we saw previously within the anniversary specials. So anything can be possible for retcons and origin stories. So we can speculate that at some point within the timeline, the nerd was Board James, which explains why we never got to see Motherfucker Mike or Bad Luck Bootsy ever again, given the fact that they were all just within his imagination. And that's kind of all there is to it with the Angry Video Game Nerd. Not a lot of heavy lore, just funny skits within these reviews that I tend to really enjoy and try to make it into a more serious, in-depth analysis in a way. And now I want to talk about a project that I'm a little afraid to discuss, despite the fact that I need to talk about it due to historical purposes for the video, and that is Farewell FamiKamen Rider. For those who are familiar with that title, you probably already know where the video is heading towards. For those who don't know, here's a little bit of backstory. This was a project created by Kaylin Cicito, aka Mars Girl. It was dedicated to the late Justin Carmical, aka Wario, who in 2014 took his own life. But it wasn't until 2018 when it was revealed to the world that he was indeed a sexual predator. Farewell FamiKamen Rider was released in 2015, and it remains on YouTube to this very day, despite the controversy surrounding Carmichael. It was hard for me to do this video because of the fact that this project exists, but I insisted on making it anyways due to the fact that, regardless of the controversy surrounding Justin Carmichael, we shouldn't discredit the hard work that people like Kaylin, Matt Burkett, Joshua Cicito, Chris Gloria, and the rest of the cast and crew all put together for this project. And even if it hasn't aged well due to those controversies, none of the cast and crew involved in this project knew about the truth behind Justin Carmichael's actions. And I do not condone any of the awful actions that were committed onto the people who were affected by Justin Carmichael. So that's where I stand, and with that being said, let's proceed. Within the events of Farewell FamiKamen Rider, a battle between him and Dr. Terawatt occurred in Canada. The battle was so violent that it caused the two to literally disappear from the face of the planet. Mars Girl was also a part of this battle and was the only survivor. Dr. Terawatt's whereabouts were left unknown, which we'll later cover in part 3. Mars Girl is then surrounded by a bunch of putty-looking creatures that keep repeating the words Aegis, as she decides to utilize the FamiKamen Rider belt to defend herself from these creatures. However, the belt rejects her, and the cartridge that utilizes the powers of the FamiKamen Rider disappears. 3 years have passed, and we later find out that the cartridge had made its way into a random yard sale in which our other main protagonist, Chris, a video game enthusiast, comes across, purchases it, and is confused by the cartridge's appearance. Chris and Mars Girl eventually team up and do battle against an evil force lurking within Sega headquarters by the name of General Kid. Chris and Mars Girl don't get along at first, but over time they eventually become good friends. They end up running into a character known as Yankee J, who was featured in many of Juwario's videos, who is eventually killed by one of General Kid's lackeys. Deciding to finally take down Kid once and for all, it's later revealed that Chris is in fact worthy of the FamiKamen Rider belt. He transforms into the FamiKamen Rider and defeats Kid for good. Chris and Mars Girl part ways, and that's where the story ends. Now, in terms of the world building for Farewell FamiKamen Rider, it's established that Nintendo in-universe is probably one of the most powerful companies in the world, since they're the ones who produced the belt in the first place. What makes it even more interesting is Mars Girl's choice of outfit and weaponry, as it's the same one that we see in the Atop the Fourth Wall movie. The gun that she uses is called a Nostalgia gun. This gun harnesses the powers to basically shoot out anything Nintendo related. For example, you could literally shoot out the Master Sword from Legend of Zelda. But other than that, that was Farewell FamiKamen Rider. Now, I want to mention again, this part of the video isn't here to justify or glorify Justin Carmical. I wanted to discuss it for historical reasons and the fact that I wanted to talk about it due to the fact that the hard work that was done by the cast and crew cannot be discredited. So with that being said, let's move on.
January 3rd, that terrible nightmare came back to me. Whenever I close my eyes, I can see the dream. Some creature crawling out of the dark, massive and inhuman.
Scarsdale Manor, former home to a 19th century explorer and collector.
Even now, it compels me onward to finish this house, and I cannot resist its whispers.
After the manor was completed, Scarsdale and his assistant fled the house and sealed it up. Until now.
This house is built on silenced screams.
A Voice from the Dark is very different from the other crossover specials because this is an audio drama adventure and not a live-action movie. Occurring within the year 2019, the plot centers around Linkara gathering a bunch of reviewers who are former producers of Channel Awesome as they partake in a gathering at Scarsdale Manor. Scarsdale was a man from the past who was obsessed with the occult, and it just so happens that he used to be acquaintances with the one and only H.P. Lovecraft, who also appears in this crossover. This is also the first time we see a lot of retired reviewers appear for the very first time, like Paul Dugan and Welshie. It's kind of funny to say that because, well, they weren't really interacting with each other because it was an audio drama and they were recording this at home, but yeah, you get the idea. So yeah, a lot of reviewers that we mentioned in this video are seen in this crossover special. And it's also addressed that within this crossover, in canon, the mass exodus of Channel Awesome also happened in universe, but they don't call it Channel Awesome, they just call it the site, which was probably for the best. But it kind of sucks that in universe that had to be addressed. And to make matters even worse, the reviewers are then stuck in Scarsdale Manor and are separated from one another, and now have to survive in groups. They then realize that Scarsdale Manor is littered with supernatural entities that try to harm them. But given the fact that some of these reviewers literally have weapons or even superpowers to defend themselves, it's basically light work for them. But then the ugly truth is revealed, as it turns out that this was all orchestrated not by Scarsdale, but by Linkara and Diamanda Hagan. Kind of. Basically, this was all Linkara's plan, but he didn't intend to harm the other reviewers, not realizing that Scarsdale Manor was actually haunted. The other reviewers turn their back on him, but eventually come back, realizing that they all have a common interest in trying to escape Scarsdale Manor, so they all work together to defeat whoever is truly behind this madness, as they then run into a resurrected Scarsdale and the main antagonist of this story, The Voice. In order to defeat the voice and their many servants, they sing The Time Warp from Rocky Horror Picture Show. As they defeat the voice and escape Scarsdale Manor, Bargain Boy suggests to continue the party in Comic-Con 1. And that was kind of it for that side of the Reviewerverse. Like I mentioned early on in this video, Linkara just wrapped up one of his biggest storylines. And as of the recording of this video, there hasn't been a new storyline. As for the other creators, most of them have either retired from reviewing or have stick with the traditional reviewing style, devoid of any storyline whatsoever, such as Erod the Blockbuster Buster, who has decided to do traditional reviews rather than his lore-heavy skits. Diamanda Hagan still posts reviews to this very day, both in and out of character. And as for the other reviewers, most of them have either become podcast hosts or just retired completely. It truly felt like an end to that side of Reviewerverse lore. Like, sure, I could talk about the sequel to the Cinema Snob movie, or the cancelled anniversary special, The Devil's Gestures. But my main goal for this video was to talk about the major storylines, character arcs, and world building that the Reviewerverse had to offer, and how all of these stories and characters are connected with each other. As for now, the Reviewerverse is kind of on a standstill. But what if I told you this isn't the end of the story? The Reviewerverse continues to live on.
There! I found them. Hold my hand. We're gonna teleport to the location.
Well, here goes nothing! Wait, we're still in my room. What the heck? I thought we were supposed to be at the location of the—
So this is where you've been all this time. You think you're gonna be the universe's savior? They'll only remember you as its destroyer.
Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this latest installment to the history of the Reviewerverse retrospective. And again, shout out to Big Jack Films for helping, supporting, and consulting on this project. I couldn't have done it without him. Please check out his channel in the link in the description down below and support his Patreon. Shout out to Lady Uni for appearing in this project. And a huge shout out to Matt Burkett for giving me insights on the lore of Apollo Z Hack. Again, all of their channels are linked in the description down below. Please support them. And with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed. And next time, it will be the last installment to the history of the Reviewerverse. With that being said, this has been Spectro Heliotic, signing out.